I started this podcast because I'm fascinated by how we get better at bridge, how we reach that next level. I'm talking with expert players about how they got where they are and what they do to continue honing their skills, to less experienced players about what they're doing to improve their game, and to experts in fields outside of bridge, like learning and expertise. If you're looking to level up your game, check out my classes on Learn Bridge Online. Mondays are about the expert thought process, and Thursdays are about declare or play. You can attend the classes live or you can watch the recorded replay. I'm looking forward to leveling up together. All right, I am here today with the legendary Brad Moss. Welcome, Brad.
Hey, Adam. How you doing? Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, after talking with Fred a few weeks ago, I certainly wanted to have you on to rebut anything he said.
Fred never lies and, is very accurate in everything he says, so I would never rebut anything.
Let's start with, how did you learn bridge?
The question sort of has this underlying assumption that there was a choice involved in the matter, that there was something active about it, but it was more like, being thrown into the bridge pit and surrounded by it, and it was more of a survival mechanism. My mother played, my father played, my sister played, my uncles, my entire world that I grew up in. My mother taught classes from home, and so I ended up developing this sort of dual life where I had my bridge life and my bridge friends, and I'd go to bridge tournaments and I'd caddy and I'd do that. And then I'd have my school life and my school friends, and, the occasional attempts to mix or overlap always were complete disasters.
When did you realize you might be kind of good at bridge?
Well, again, assumptions, I don't know how good or not, but I knew I had some natural ability because my mother, maybe it was Wednesday nights or Tuesday nights ago, she'd have this big class in our living room, and I love games and learning things and competing. So, I'd listen in, and at some point I recognized that, some of the students, were not necessarily knowing the answers, even though it had been taught to them 5 minutes earlier or again and again. And, I definitely knew the answer. So, I recognize that I, at least compared to some of her students, I had some ability. And I was very lucky in my bridge journey to be surrounded by so many world-class players. And so my learning curve was really steep. I was a particularly arrogant, obnoxious kid. So as I'm learning and getting better, I naturally thought that meant, oh my God, at this trajectory in about 5 minutes, I'm going to be the best player in the world. So, confidence was not my problem back then.
Did you read bridge books as a kid?
It's weird. I've always been a voracious reader, but never read bridge books at all.
Never read a single book?
No.
Interesting.
At this point, it's stubborn, but
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
How did you learn technical things like squeezes if you didn't read?
I had advantages that, to an extent, that it's hard to imagine very many people could compete with. I mean, my mother is a multi-time world championship, Gail Greenberg, my sister, Jill Levin. My father was an outstanding player, many-time national champion. And all of the world and the friends, I was surrounded by all these people that were really kind to me and took time and played with me and talked to me. And I love games. I love competing. I love learning things. My present passion is I've spent the last month setting records of online Barbu attendance. If I ever am fortunate enough to develop some competency, I'll probably lose a significant amount of interest, no matter how beautiful the game is, because it's really the learning and mastering that I find so exciting and fun, more so than even the being good at something.
So did someone sit you down and teach you the mechanics of squeezes, for example?
So, it was definitely a mixed bag. And my parents are very different people and had different approaches. My mother, cagey dog that she is, forbid me from learning how to play, despite the fact that I was surrounded by it in our home and, hours a day, whether I wanted to or not, I was exposed to it. So, of course, the first thing I naturally did was run out and insist to, that I learn how to play. But when she saw what I was learning, she's like, well, I don't want you to learn to play, but I'm certainly not going to stand by. I want you to learn that. So, every year for our birthdays, we were allowed any treats to do whatever we want. And I would always say, okay, Mom, let's go play at the clubs. So I learned from her, and I would then follow them to tournaments and stuff like that. And I made friends, and so I would do that. But the biggest learning that I did was with my father. Um, and so the real turning point was we went to the Southeasterns back when it was played in Bal Harbor. And it was a beautiful, incredible tournament, amazing hotel. And I loved it. But so I spent a week with him, and I was so nervous. Like, I wasn't living with him. My father was an intimidating guy. And to say that
How old are you at this point?
I think maybe I was probably 12, 13, something like that. And to say that he was a uneven partner would be very generous. Over the course of the week that we played together, I would think 3 different people offer to call the police.
Seriously.
Yeah, yeah. I will say this. I learned an enormous amount. I started out absolutely hopeless, and I ended up absolutely hopeless, but I was much better by the end of the week. He did not tolerate mistakes at all. He was not kind, but I learned a lot. And I will say from him, for better or worse, and there's both good and bad certainly to it, but I learned my desire to win and intensity at the table from him. I remember I was getting better and better. And we started out, no matter how well he played, we had no chance in the beginning. But by the last Sunday, we actually won the Swiss. And the Southeastern at that time was it was like Gatlinburg today. It was the biggest tournament, and it was incredible fields. And so winning with not necessarily very good teammates was an accomplishment. And the last match on the last day, we're playing against, some world-class famous team, and we're playing against Jim Jacoby, and, even I knew who that was, and I was, nervous. And so my father's like, okay, this is what you have to do. He said, you have to sort your hand. You have to grab your hand, walk 10 feet away from the table, sort it, and then not look at it again. And I said, I don't want to do that. And he said, you're doing it. And I said, I don't want to do that. And he forced me to do it, and it was mortifying. Still to this day, I cringe when I think about having done that. But that's what it was like playing with my father.
Because he thought they were going to see your cards?
They probably were. I was not very good at holding it back. But, that sort of not caring about anything except winning. Be careful how I say this. Using all of your tools at your disposal to the best of your advantage. He was an intense guy. He was very, very intense.
And that stuck with you?
For better or worse, in many ways. It's taken me years later to untangle some of the things I less enjoyed. But I learned a lot and got a lot better because of it.
So how does that manifest today at the table in terms of your competitiveness, your focus?
So I'm a different person than I was. I've grown up a lot. It was really only one way to go because I was starting from such a low point. The truth is, I don't want to win as much as I did 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I mean, I still want to win. I work incredibly hard, and I have a huge passion to win. But then I was singular in my focus and intense. I would want to go over every board, after the tournament and think about it. And I would constantly think system. And, I have kids and a life and things that make me really happy. And I'm more balanced. And it's made me a better partner and a better teammate and a more well-rounded person. At the the sort of Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours thing, in that stage, that sort of singular focus and intensity is highly conducive to steepening your curve. And that's, I lived that for a little while.
Do you think that's necessary at some point in your development as a bridge player?
It was necessary in mine.
Yeah.
I don't know about other people where people are different, but for me, if I was going to get where I wanted to go or to achieve what I was capable of achieving, I needed that.
Have you evolved as a partner?
I've mellowed. When I started with Fred, he was the best guy. I mean, Fred is the best guy. He's just the salt of the earth. But I was tough. I mean, I was so intense. And Fred was a totally different person. He was very calm. And so we helped each other, and that would be the way we would both phrase it, to be generous to me. I mean, I did. I helped him, get more intense and focused when it wasn't his nature. But, that's a pretty generous way to actually describe what was happening. He was tolerating me being, an arrogant asshole and wanting to win. We were always very, very concerned about ethics. So it wasn't win at all costs, but within our moral code, I wanted to work hard and drive at the table. I didn't want to, and I'm not defending this, it's terrible, but I didn't want to make friends. I mean, I just wanted to win. I wanted to be the best we could be. I wanted to play as hard as we could, and I wanted to win. And I'm a much happier person now because I want to at all times be nice. I want to be friends with people. It's a small world and a short life, and it's a much better balance, both in terms of longevity of partnership, quality of life. So some of the lessons I learned from my father were great and have helped me, and some I've spent decades unlearning.
Were you aware of that when you started playing with Joe? And did you feel like you were kind of trying to turn a new leaf?
Fred and I had been talking for quite a while that at some point he was going to stop. He wanted to, and when that happened, that Joe and I would play together. But Joe, was in another partnership and was very concerned, and we were concerned about making sure that his former partner had a good situation. And so even though Joe and I had been talking now for years about wanting to play together, we were both committed to making sure that our existing partners transitioned in a way that was optimal for them. And so we actually started a couple years after when we really wanted to start. But when the time came and, Fred was saying, okay, I've had enough of you. I can only do so much. And, I'm going to walk away now. And I said, okay, I'm going to play with Joe. And he said, great. I honestly think you guys can be the best, but if you're going to be, you need to understand something. And I said, okay, tell me. And he said, you have to be me now. Said you have to take on the role I was forced to take on with you, and even things out and calm them and eat some crap at some times. And because Joe is 10 years younger than I was, and now this is not the situation, or at least not to the extent, but I ate a lot of shit for a little while with Joe. First of all, I love Joe with all my heart. He's one of the best people I've ever met, an incredible player and all of that, but he was very thin-skinned, and he was me. He was what I was years earlier. Fred described it perfectly. He said, if you want to get where you want to go, you're going to have to be me and do the role that I was. And that was incredibly helpful. And now things are very different. And I will say this to Joe, over time, I'm still not easy to play. I will never be Fred. I will never be the same that Fred is. So Joe and I have learned how to navigate each other in ways that brings out the best. There are times when I say things or do things and Joe is like biting his tongue because he knows if he reacts, it won't be as good an outcome as if he doesn't. And I do the same for him. And, as bridge partnerships in some ways are like marriages. And so we've learned to navigate these situations well, but it's a learning process and a journey. And, we both have, personalities, and, mine certainly can be more challenging than his. Everyone loves Joe. Joe's a very easy person.
How much of partnership then do you think is bridge, system, and all of that? And how much is the interpersonal stuff?
Obviously, it's both. I think it depends partly on your objectives, right? I think if your objectives are to be good players, to win, to be able to, beat some teams and do some things and go to tournaments and enjoy the social aspects, it has a different feel than when you are solely focused and, we want to win a world championship. I think that the work that's required, the sacrifice that's required, it's a different level of commitment. And therefore, you have to be willing to do certain things. Like, I have to be willing, or Joe has to be willing to swallow certain things or take certain things that, why should we do that? Because we're married to each other. We want to be the best. We want to, accomplish X, Y, and Z. And in order to do that, that's what's required. But if our sole goal was to be really good, go at tournaments, go have fun, hang with our friends, then see you later, click, So I really think it's about what it is you're wanting to accomplish and what you're willing to do to get.
So you start playing with Joe after a couple year courtship.
Yes.
And you're very much in the mindset of we want to be and can be one of the very top pairs in the world. And you're willing to put in whatever time and energy is needed. What did that process look like over the first year or two?
So Joe and I play an unusual system. We do it because we think it's right. Yeah, I sort of look at it to like, value betting, at the poker table or something like that, trying to optimize and squeeze out, value and theoretical advantage at every nook and cranny is, pretty much our mantra. So playing natural bidding in some vulnerabilities, artificial in others, and sort of hybrid, sort of different things, is customizing as much as possible while also remembering we're humans and not computers, and therefore, not trying to squeeze out everything. We want to ease our burden and not make reading the notes such a torture, because the more tortured it is, and it's torture, the less frequently you'll do it. So we started at a place where I wanted to play natural. I played natural with Fred. I love natural. I think that starting with a natural opening minor is an enormous advantage. I think that for constructive bidding, I think that in like the top precision pairs, like to name Americans like Greco Hampson, they've done an enormous amount of work. And so they overcome a lot of the shortcomings. But for me personally, I think that if you're having a purely constructive auction, starting with a nebulous minor is a big hindrance to getting to the right contract. And I think that at the same time, it's an incredibly difficult thing to play against, and obstructive, and has enormous value if employed in a way meant to make life difficult for your opponents. So Joe wanted to play precision. That's what he had played with Curtis. So we were at this impasse where we wanted to play together, but I wanted to play natural and he wanted to play precision. So we talked and came up with the idea that we would do it based on vulnerability. Now, a lot of people suggested that we do it based on the opponent's vulnerability, right? So if we open a strong club and they're vulnerable, that would be the way to do it. But what I believed, and what I still believe, is that it's more important about our vulnerability. So it's still, if we open a strong club, either the opponent, when we're not vulnerable, the opponents are either unfavorable or an equal white, which is not such an appealing time to preempt or get in your face. But more important to me is that what I wanted to be able to do with precision, I want to be able to open really light hands, all 10-point hands, even lighter. And because we're already playing a system that's sacrificing some bidding accuracy. So let's just sacrifice it all the way. Maybe we can rob you blind and make things as difficult as possible. We can have an auction where we bid, and you have no idea who has any points. And by the way, you're culprit 3, no trump. Good luck. And so what we did is, when we were not vulnerable, we opened precision. And when we were vulnerable, when it was more important, when it was, the rewards of playing the hand and getting to the right contract are more important. And we don't want to go minus 300 every time we're screwing around, with 14 points on the 3 level. And when we're vulnerable, we played natural. And we've customized it and tinkered with it since then. But that initial thought is held true. And honestly, I think it's our biggest advantage by a mile in what we do. We do a lot of interesting, fun things in bidding. We work really hard on system. We think about it a lot. We talk about it a lot. We bid every day, lots and lots of hands. But I believe strongly that our biggest advantage is playing different systems at different vulnerabilities.
Where do you see that edge? Like, obviously you just talked about the theoretical advantages, but if you play a long match against the nickel team where, 3 top pairs, but they all play the same system all the time, like where do you see the wins?
I think that the ability, when we're not vulnerable, to open these really aggressive hands that other pairs don't. Everyone works so hard on their constructive bidding. People work hard on competitive bidding, but their agreements tend not to be nearly as detailed and defined. There's an advantage to opening the bidding. I think that being able to do that not vulnerable has paid real dividends. We do sometimes when we're not vulnerable, we have like our 12 opposite 12s and 13s, and we miss games that everyone else in the room is in. That doesn't really bother me. It bothers Joe more because, frankly, I think he remembers the bad results and not the good ones. Being able to get in their face and open on hands where it's not asystemic when we're not vulnerable is just a huge, huge edge. There's so many hands where it's just a normal, they get to game, at most tables, and our opponents have a really hard time. And another part of that is third seat white actions. Because it's gone pass, we open all 10-point hands and many 9s and 8s. We so often know we don't have games, or it goes past and we can overcall. So we can disguise the location of points so well. We could open the bidding and make a 2/1, and you have no idea which one of us is 10 and which one of us is 5, or 8 and 5, or whatever it is. And we alert everything, we show everybody, but but we have so much more information than everyone else does in that situation. We can not only get into your auction with much more safety, we can do so in deceptive ways.
Where does that go with, we're Brad Moss and Joe Grew. If it just goes 1-0, 3-0 at every table, we have an edge. Like, it seems like you're creating randomness.
Sure. So it's always a delicate balance, right? My background is with math and numbers, and so I believe in that. The thing is, it's harder and harder to forecast what everyone is going to do. First of all, everyone plays different systems, and everyone plays their cards really well at this point. The game is so much harder today than it was even 10 years ago, but 20 years. Like, you used to be able to sit back and try and not make many mistakes. And if you don't make that many, you'll win. And that's just not the case anymore. There's just too many good players out there and people that have too good a system. And everyone's systems is different. So it's very hard to always know that it's going to go 1-0, 3-0, and everyone's going to lead the same thing. So if you can do things that create significant positive EV, then you should do that.
What does your routine at a tournament look like? Do you have rituals, superstitions, anything that you feel like gets you to the table at your best self?
I like to say I'm superstitious about not being superstitious. I really don't care about seat direction or socks or writing with this pencil or, score of this or that, all of that. Every drop of energy one puts towards something like that is misdirected, in my opinion. So preparation, though, is incredibly important. You can get more performance out of yourself if you're eating well and sleeping well and exercising. For instance, before this trials where we're playing Joe and I are going to play paddle for a week and, get ourselves right. And that just makes an enormous difference. I've always been a terrible sleeper, and it's a problem. Sleep's important, and I don't sleep well. I'm always up. It's not good. But at tournaments, I've learned to not eat. I love food. Food is probably my biggest, pleasure and passion. I don't drink at nationals at all. More like, if I'll go out for a nice dinner with friends, I'll have a cocktail or two. But for the most part, I don't drink, and certainly not during a knockout. And even if I can't sleep, I've learned to tough it out and just stay there and just close my eyes and try and relax, which is difficult for me. It's not a natural choice. I can't go from the craps table to the bridge table, in 1 second and go and hope to win. That was me 40 years ago or 30 years ago. That is not me today. I need to sleep. I need to relax. So your routine, your exercise, I love being 10, 20 minutes away from the game and walking, even though it's not a workout, but getting to, get my 10,000 steps in and being right and not, having fried foods and stuff like that at a tournament. It makes a big difference for me, at least.
Have you tried sleeping pills?
I will occasionally do it if I'm in really bad shape, but whether it's real or imagined, I can't say, but I feel sluggish the next day and less able to, access computing power when I've taken it. So I try and avoid it.
What does your routine at a tournament look like? Do you have rituals, superstitions, anything that you feel like gets you to the table at your best self?
I like to say I'm superstitious about not being superstitious. I really don't care about seat direction or socks or writing with this pencil or, score of this or that, all of that. Every drop of energy one puts towards something like that is misdirected, in my opinion. So preparation, though, is incredibly important. You can get more performance out of yourself if you're eating well and sleeping well and exercising. For instance, before this trials where we're playing Joe and I are going to play paddle for a week and, get ourselves right. And that just makes an enormous difference. I've always been a terrible sleeper, and it's a problem. Sleep's important, and I don't sleep well. I'm always up. It's not good. But at tournaments, I've learned to not eat. I love food. Food is probably my biggest, pleasure and passion. I don't drink at nationals at all. More like, if I'll go out for a nice dinner with friends, I'll have a cocktail or two. But for the most part, I don't drink, and certainly not during a knockout. And even if I can't sleep, I've learned to tough it out and just stay there and just close my eyes and try and relax, which is difficult for me. It's not a natural choice. I can't go from the craps table to the bridge table, in 1 second and go and hope to win. That was me 40 years ago or 30 years ago. That is not me today. I need to sleep. I need to relax. So your routine, your exercise. I love being 10, 20 minutes away from the game and walking, even though it's not a workout, but getting to, get my 10,000 steps in and eating right and not, having fried foods and stuff like that at a tournament. It makes a big difference for me, at least.
Have you tried sleeping pills?
I will occasionally do it if I'm in really bad shape, but whether it's real or imagined, I can't say, but I feel sluggish the next day and less able to, access computing power when I've taken it. So I try and avoid it.
Your life look like between tournaments? You don't play a ton of regionals, right?
So my game took a huge jump when, for about 3 or 4 years, I started playing a huge amount of regionals. Whatever my performance level was, it took a jump that I think is unusual for the amount I had already played to that point. Listen, you don't get rich betting against Bob Hammond. He's one of the people I respect most in the world, and it's been an idol of mine my whole life. But one thing he said to me, which, while I understand the wisdom of it, I actually think he was wrong about. He told me that the pros that play every week, or most every week, are at a huge disadvantage, that they end up playing more rote and lose some creativity and fears of stepping out and being different. And I understand his point, and there's certainly wisdom to it, but I think he's fundamentally wrong. At least in my experience, for those few years when I went out and played an enormous amount of bridge, my game took such a big jump that, again, I think it's unusual for the amount that I had already played to now make a jump like that as a bridge player. And I attribute that to the amount that I played.
How do you experience that jump in level? Like, what did you feel was getting better?
I made far fewer mistakes. Consistency. Also, I have a natural tendency to be unafraid to do something different than everyone else, to not take the road most traveled. And I think for the most part, that's a good thing. But I think it can come off as and manifest as sort of hero ball type of behavior. And finding the right balance of when to do that and when not to do that is something I learned with the increased number of boards, because to that point, I struggled with that for sure.
Were you playing mostly with Joe that year?
During this time period, yeah. This was post Fred and with Joe, and we played just a huge amount. And I played with other people too. I played with Justin Lal, who was my best friend, and played with a number of people, great players, which really helps a lot to play with great players that are not your regular partner. You see things differently. You're exposed to different things. That takes you out of your comfort zone. Like, I think we should all play with one arm tied behind our back sometimes, one eye closed, metaphorically, to see things from a different perspective. You stand up on the desk and look around and see how things look different. I think it's beneficial to all of us. Doing that for that time period was just enormously beneficial.
Why don't you still do that?
Because every single minute I miss with my kids before they go to school is too steep a price at this point. So I try and find the right balance. They're going to be gone soon, and I'm terrified about it. And so I don't know when they do go, what I'll do or what choices I'll make. I'm not really sure about that, to be honest. But for now, for the next few years, Cubits has been really helpful for Joe and I. We bid so many hands every day. It's been great, but it's not the same. Going to some regionals or going to do some things is beneficial. So I try and find the right balance for that. But for now, it's a big price I pay.
Other than Cubids with Joe, do you do anything else between tournaments to keep yourself sharp?
We work with Michael Rosenberg on our notes. We are constantly working on our system and notes. Something Fred and I used to do. We would get together every year, and whether we go skiing or someone would come to each other's house, and we'd spend a week, 3-4 days, whatever, going through notes. And it was good. It helped. It helped weed stuff up that the tax of playing it and the memory and the reading wasn't worth the benefit.
What do your notes with Joe look like? How long are they?
So we hired Michael to work with us, as I said, and the first thing he said to me is, God, I'm surprised. I thought your notes were going to be so much longer. And then after a couple of weeks of reviewing and working, he goes, okay, I get it. Your notes are over 500 pages. You just don't write it all because you don't want to read it. And we're like, yes. He helped us. We have a short version and a long version.
So how long is the short version of the notes?
That's constantly evolving, because he has a short version, I have a short version, things that we struggle with or we want to remember or new or stuff like that. So it can be 2 pages, it could be 20. It's just constantly whatever we do. But the actual version of our notes, I think it's around 140, something like that, but it's really quite a bit longer.
When you're at a tournament, how often do you read through the short version?
A lot. Most
Like every day?
Every day is a lot, but more than once at a tournament for sure.
What do you do leading up to a tournament? Does your routine change?
That's evolved as our partnership is going. It used to be that we would always try and play a tournament right before. I had gone through a significant period of time where I'd play the nationals or the trials, and then that'd be it. So it'd take me a few days to get warmed up. But in that 3 or 4 year period where I was playing constantly, something just changed, and I never feel that way anymore. Even now, when I go 3 months without playing, which is incredibly rare, but when it happens, I still don't feel like I did before that. I can't really explain why that is, but it's true. I don't ever feel the way I used to feel. So now our preparation is going through system, updating things, making sure we actually know the problem areas. We bid so many hands every single day that, it's at this point, there's not a lot of mystery for us.
How much discussion happens on QBids during these bidding sessions?
A lot. If something comes up, me more than Joe, certainly. But it was funny when we first started playing and, something would come up, this is pre-QBids, but where I'd say, oh, well, what do you think of this? He was sort of taken back, like he thought I was asking, what should I do in this? When I really was not asking him what I should do. Saying is, what's your thinking? What's going through your mind with this? How do you react to that? And I think we've gotten pretty good at trying to learn how the other one views a problem, where now when we're at the table and something happens, we sort of know how the other one thinks and views these things. And you're a partnership. We play the same system, but we're also different people with different biases and ideas. Long-standing partnerships have a huge advantage in this front. We know each other. And so, when people give us hands, oftentimes we'll say, well, this is what I would do, but Joe would do this. Or Joe would say, well, this is what I would do, but Brad would do this. In some ways, it's a lot easier now than it used to be because of that.
I assume it's the same with style. Like I know what Joe's two-spade first seat white red is going to look like.
Yeah. I've been lucky in that both of my long-term partnerships are basic philosophies of the game aligned really well.
How are Joe and Fred on the same wavelength with you fundamentally?
I guess the way I would say it is it manifests as when we're presented with a problem and it's a difficult situation. Even when we come to different conclusions, our thought process aligns really well. Listen, at its core, Bridge is a game of logic, right? It's an incomplete information game, but you plug in what you know and you take your best guess. It's not chess. If it was, it'd be a whole lot less interesting. But at its core, Bridge is a game of logic. But within that, there's as much art as science, and how you view about that, how you prioritize this or that, or your comfort zone. There are differences, how Bobby Levin would bid this hand and how Jeff Hampson would bid it often won't be the same, but they're two of the best players to ever play. So, there's got to be room for answers that aren't binary.
What do you think are the big things that differentiate someone at your level from someone at my level? How much of it is Bridge knowledge and skill, and how much of it is the focus, consistency, just like getting the best out of yourself at the table?
I think all of the things that you just mentioned play significant roles of getting the most out of yourself. I think that the more you focus on something and are singular in that approach, the better you'll do. For me personally, I had such enormous advantages when I was starting that it's a really unique situation. I was surrounded by world champions. In a very real way, you're as good as your opponents and what you're exposed to. No matter how, Helga Mo is probably the closest thing we've ever had to a true prodigy, right? Or even he, there's no like prodigy where you sit down, all of a sudden you're a world-class player. It takes experience and time and hard work. And there's no shortcut to that. Obviously, there's natural ability, right? That is a phenomena that exists, and it will be highly determinative on your floor and ceiling. But in bridge, do you embrace playing against the best people and getting your brains out, or does that unappealing to you? If you draw the top team and you know you're going to lose by 100, I think the people that go into that match thinking this is fantastic, I think they're more likely to have a steeper curve and get better and do better. The people going, you know what, I love bridge, I love learning, I love getting better, but I want to have a good time, and losing by 100 doesn't sound that appealing to me. I think that they're maybe less conducive to getting the most out of yourself. And so I think that having that sort of attitude where it being process over results, about, working hard, being focused, how hard you want to work, what do I want to play up? Do I want to play down? It's all about your goals. Again, what is it that you want to get out of this?
Well, you should expect we'll play all 8 segments no matter what the score is.
Well, it's always a pleasure. You're fantastic, and I love your approach to the game.
So let's say I wanted to hire you as my consultant. And I said, okay, the goal is to get better this year, whatever that means. And I'm going to put 40 hours a week into it, right? This is like, I'm serious about this. How should I spend that 40 hours? What would you be telling me to do?
I think maybe part of it is catering to individuals. I think the areas where we can get the most benefit for our allocation of resource is in the areas that we struggle. Some people need a lot of hands. Some people need emotional work. Some people need to, table things, or understanding that the game is beyond the cards that are played, or, things like that. Intellectual honesty is so vital in everything, but certainly in bridge is no exception. You need to be honest and say, okay, what do I do well? What do I do badly? And I think that knowing yourself and knowing the areas where you can sort of take a giant diagnostic is what I would do. I'd say, okay, let's sit down. Let's talk for a while. Let's play some hands. Let's look at a match you played and look at the boards and see what went right and what went wrong. And I think from that process, you can make a plan and say, okay, let's start here. If you want to get really good and you want to improve your game, you need to work hard. You need to put in the time and subordinate your ego.
What does post-tournament analysis for you and Joe look like? Do you review boards at the tournament?
It depends on the situation. If it's something that comes up where it needs to be fixed, like because this hand could come up the next board, we'll talk about it very quickly. If it's something where, I'm surprised that happened, I'm surprised one of us did this, we'll often talk about it, after the session. It depends if we're playing all the boards, right? It's very different, right? If we're playing all the boards, we're not talking at the tournaments. If we're not playing every board and we have time at the tournaments, that is our sweet spot. And we'll talk about it that night or at dinner or in between, or if we have a break, but we're not going to go over every single detail. That's more for in between tournaments. Nationals, world championships, the trials, that's about execution, performance.
So when the tournament's over, do you do any sort of post-mortem together?
We do. It's a question of degree and allocation.
It's not every board.
It's not every board. We find more value in logging on Cubans and bidding 100 hands, and as things come up there in real time, I'll type in my things and he'll type in his, and there's no ego involved. It's like no one's feelings are going to get hurt. So, we have fun it's fun, and as much as that sort of work can be.
How much do you think that separates the top pairs, just like the amount of work that goes into it?
I think the difference between the card play amongst the top 100 players is so small. I mean, whoever you think the best card player is, right? The amount of hands that they'll defeat or make or whatever in a tournament versus the 100th best player is not relevant. The differentiation amongst the truly best players, in my opinion, on card play is not enough to cause the dispersion of results that we see. And, system is a huge part of it. Non-bridge factors, emotional, getting the most out of yourself, sleeping, taking care of yourself, focus, but working hard. It's probably the number one driver.
I've always been surprised because I agree with you. Like the difference between the top player and the 100th player in terms of just technical ability is not that different.
Not enough to matter in a small period of time.
Certainly not between like number 20 and number 100, right? There's a few guys at the top. But the fact that 2 really good partnerships playing with a very weak sponsor is still like usually a better team than 3 pretty good pairs. It really says something about how much better those absolute top half a dozen partnerships really are.
It used to be you could go to a nationals, play well, get lucky, and beat any team. It's very hard for a non-professional team to beat a professional team at this point. It's not impossible, clearly. Everyone plays well. Everyone plays good systems. And I just lost in the round of 64, to some really talented young players. But it's less common and less frequent. I think that bidding systems have gotten so much more user-friendly. Our understanding of how to get the most out of maybe a sponsor or player who's not the strongest, we can do a lot more. And the ceiling is definitely raised in an asymmetrical way, as you pointed out. But the floor is raised too. The weakest sponsors, they're still hopeless card players sometimes, but we're so much better at navigating that than we used to be. And so it's an asymmetrical return, right? If you bring up someone who's in the 5th percentile or the 12th percentile to the 40th percentile, that's a big jump than if you bring up somebody who's from the 73rd to the 75th, or the 90th to the 90.1, Making that sort of progress has profound impact on your expectancy.
Any other advice that you would give to me, to other listeners here who are, actively trying to get better at bridge?
Like anything, it's about expectations. If you're the person that wants to say, I love this game, this is important to me, I want to become the best player that I can be, and my drive for that, then work hard, work hard. So know your expectations. If you want to go to tournaments, you want to have fun, then do that. But don't let inertia make decisions for you. Have a plan, know what your goals are, and make all of your decisions to that end, whatever that end is. So for me, when I decided I wanted to be the best that I could be, my decisions became singularly focused on that. And I worked hard. I made the choice. Am I going to go watch this TV show? Or am I going to sit here and, write out this auction and try and figure out how to make it better? And that's the choice.
And it boggles my mind that part of that choice wasn't, I'm going to read every bridge book that I can get my hands on.
We all learn differently. It's weird though, because I love to read.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I'm a stubborn SOB.
Yeah.
Once I said I'm not going to read a bridge book, that was that.
You should read some of my books. They're pretty good.
I should. I agree. I was afraid this was coming. I've read no bridge books except yours. I've only read yours, but I've read every word.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. All right, Brad. Well, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot.
Thank you for doing this, Adam, both in terms of it was fun, and thank you for helping the game and promoting the game to people of all levels and making it more accessible.